All right, we are back with the Union Way podcast, and the last interview I just did was with Chris Hwang, who has one of the most interesting stories about getting into film via Wall Street. And so he was employee number 7 at Pond 5. He is now a C-suite member at Filmpac, and his passion for customer service and growing businesses through understanding the real wants and problems and needs of the client is inspiring, is I think the word that I'm looking for. So Chris has such a cool story. He has a pinstripe suit that he's told to never wear again. He has an all-nighter under his belt as he heads into a meeting with Squarespace. And I'll just let him tell the story, and then throughout the rest of the episode, you're gonna hear amazing golden nuggets. If it comes to you wanting to learn how to talk to your customers, Chris is the one who's gonna teach you how to do it. So take us back for anybody who doesn't know too much about you.
Yeah.
Your start in finance in New York, and what was going on, and if you would take us up through the hard left turn that I do know involves Squarespace and lands you in another company other people would know.
Yeah. No, that's good. Graduated with a communications degree, and I think I barely graduated. Went to Northwestern. I don't think Northwestern cares that much about me, but for me, that was just kind of it. It was just like that. I just kind of coasted and wasn't really that driven, to be honest. And then the credit crisis happened. So around 06, 07, for some of your viewers, they may understand that like that was pretty shaky. And I think for me, part of the growing up was really trying to figure out how to navigate that environment where people were losing jobs left and right, and some people weren't even getting jobs. And I think for me, because I didn't have really an understanding of finance or investment banking, I just kind of asked some of my friends, I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm doing investment banker, I'm doing consulting. And that's literally how I picked it up. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. You get paid well, and I guess I'll figure it out. And I had no lick of finance. I didn't take any courses. I did a pass fail on economics. That was it. And I barely passed. Like the night before, I asked my roommate, who was an economics major, he's like my best friend. So he was just like, all right, man, like he literally spent 3 hours trying to prep me up like overnight, and then took the test and fortunately passed. So
yeah, amazing.
So I had to learn accounting from scratch. I had to pick up books. I had to dedicate hours and hours and hours of while people are doing their thing, socializing and stuff. For me, like I had to do all of that, and then eventually found myself at Jefferies. And at that point, I was a first-year analyst. Bear Stearns. So what's amazing in that world was when I landed, a few weeks later, Bear Stearns went bankrupt. And then the Lehman Brothers, like visible sign in Times Square, was a very, very quintessential, sign of Lehman Brothers, turned into this like light blue, like Barclays. And because Barclays subsumed Lehman. So that was the wild world I was living in. And then all of a sudden, friends in my analyst class were saying, hey, I got let go today. It wasn't uncommon to see like bankers with boxes walking out, and so that was the world. It was a wild world that I was living in. And so I ended up joining the Bear Stearns media investment banking team at Jefferies. So that entire media practice got wiped away. They brought on board Bear Stearns media bankers, and they were a wild bunch, and it was a small, lean team. I think they were the quintessential, like, poor, hungry, driven, like I forgot what it was, but that was sort of the mafia kind of like mentality, is like, we're going to outwork you. I just won a lot of their favor. And I was just kind of like going in this blind, and they invited me to join their team, and I took on way more responsibility than any of my other analyst class, just because they were lean and trying to figure stuff out. I learned a tremendous amount. And at the end of it, got ranked at the top of my class for 2 years, and that was pretty sweet. But at the end of the day, like for me, my hunger was learning about these companies and how they built the companies to get to the hundreds of millions of dollars of financing, or selling this company for $3.4 billion. Or for me, I was really curious. I was like, hey, how did that even begin? So for me, I just naturally, just intuitively want to ask, like I would read the S1 and I just always fell in love with like the origin story. Like it was the business models were really important, obviously. And I always loved kind of like, how do they figure out how to make money? But for me, it really began with like, how did they build the product or service in the first place? Like, how did you even kind of come up with that, you know? And so I think that was really the first signals of like realizing that like, I kind of have more of that entrepreneurial mindset. I want to like roll up my sleeves and I want to be like right there in the front lines and like win a customer. So that was my world. And then I ended up pulling an all-nighter for a company called Squarespace. This was my third year. And at that point, it was really clear that like I wasn't going to take the long-term investment banking track. And ultimately I had to kind of figure out what life would look like afterwards. And at that time, like around 2010, like, you know, the startup world wasn't really a thing in New York City. You were still working at big institutions. That's kind of what you did. For those who carved their own path, it was sort of like you were sort of an edge case scenario. But ultimately, with me, with Squarespace, they were trying to figure out whether they should sell the business. So should we sell the business or should we raise a Series A? You know,
and what were they valued at that time?
I honestly don't know that, but I would say that it is, you know, where it's traded now, like where it's valued now. I mean, it's incomparable, right? 100 times maybe. They were just they were small, but they were growing incredibly fast. I got to have the fortunate opportunity to work with the chairman of our investment banking committee at that time. And so I just remember walking into that room and I had that pinstripe suit, pulled an all-nighter, was smelly. It was just miserable. And then Anthony walked in and he came in like shorts, you know, and t-shirt and flip-flops and just like, you know, peace, what's up? And I just remember like, I'm like, what is this? Like, this is insane. So that's when I got introduced to like internet companies, you know, as crazy as it is, like we had a practice called the internet practice, right? And that was really working with these high growth startups that had scale potential. And I was trying to get a little bit early. So we had the fortunate opportunity to have Squarespace and provide some advisory services to them. And one of the questions was, hey, should we just kind of call it a day and get some liquidity and move on? And obviously, you know, we know what the decision is. They chose to go their own path and IPO, and they're doing great. But ultimately for me, it was just a whole new world that kind of changed me. And so I ended up reaching out to Anthony and right afterwards, and I said, hey, just can you do me a favor? Like, I have no clue what this world is all about, but I just want to figure this out. And he connected me to his COO at that time, Jesse Hertzberg. And Jesse invited me to Squarespace. So to this day, like Squarespace is a pivotal like, you know, player in terms of getting me in. And I do think there's a lesson there for me that I've never forgotten, which is like, I'm always going to try to give people who maybe on paper they don't deserve a shot, I'm going to give them a shot anyway. So because I don't deserve, there's nothing in me that deserved a shot. People at that time, like all they look for is developers, coders, engineers, right? I was just kind of this like finance guy, right? Like we don't need spreadsheets right now. And so the fact that like, you know, the founder and CEO of a company, right, and would take the time to look at my email, pass it along to the CEO, tell the CEO to actually spend time out of his busy day to actually invite me to the office, you know, that speaks a lot more volumes than I think sometimes people realize. And so came in that pinstripe suit, and Jesse looked at me and he said, you know, number one, you know, don't ever wear a pinstripe suit ever again. And I always joke around, I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like writing in my little resume, like, you know, notepad and stuff. And then he told me, he said, you should check out this recruiting event. No harm for you to just do it, you know, and get exposed to this world. And so that's what I did. I went there, and then lo and behold, you know, passed out. I think the number was 60 resumes. 60 or 80, I forget. Depends on the day and who I'm talking to. But
sure, the fish was about this big.
Yeah. It was actually demoralizing because I passed resumes, and they would say, "Hey, what languages are you proficient in?" And I'm like, English. I was like, "What did Jesse do?" It's like, thanks. You know, he just basically tanked any inkling of hope that I'll be able to bust into the startup scene here. I literally had a stack of resumes. It was the very last one. And it was actually, we're closed up. So people are already closing up. They're giving each other high fives, drinking beers, whatever. And there's this one company in the corner and they're still going at it. And that's important because that was just their culture. It's like never stop and always trying to get that extra opportunity. And I passed that resume to the founder of the company that I would be involved with for the next 12 years of my life. And so that founder was Tom Bennett. He was the CEO of a very little known company called Pond 5. And little did I know, they were growing like gangbusters. 90+% of the business was all organic driven, SEO driven, one of the fastest growing marketplaces that no one has ever heard of. That torpedoed me into the world of what's called content licensing. So we built out the largest repository of stock footage, which obviously is relevant to what you guys do. And that's ultimately how I got my first entry ticket into that world. So I think for me, a lot of it is like, yeah, there's a hustle to it, but at the end of the day, it's like the hustle is what allows you to get into those wacko opportunities that you would have never envisioned, assuming you're going to say something stupid, assuming you're going to get rejected, but still doing it anyway, because there's something inside of you for whatever reason that's driving you. Say, I've got to break through. I got to figure this out. And ultimately, I had a lot of people in my life who've given me those opportunities, even if I was a knucklehead at that time or the way that I approached it.
Sometimes the knucklehead's more endearing than the polished person, there's just a level of trustworthiness and humanity. And coming into Pond 5, I know top, first 10 employee, right? And titles only mean so much at that stage. But tell me a little bit about what you were doing when you first joined. What was your title and what did the actual day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so I basically came in as a right hand. I was a first business hire. Everyone was a freelancer, so I came in as a 1099.
Oh wow!
And and it was a weird vibe because like here I am clocking in, working like 78 hours a week, and then my first day at the office, it's like nobody's really there, or like, my founder comes in at like 11 and he's just like, he's vibing and doing work but he'll be there like all night, so it's just a weird kind of world where you needed to create some definition. But as their first business hire, yeah, they just hired me to do biz dev, strategy, operations, all the stuff that, they thought that I could be helpful for. But at the end of the day, like, I launched products. If I struck a partnership, say with Adobe, and they want to integrate our footage library into their ecosystem, then it's like, well, guess what? You have to negotiate that, figure that out, but also now you got to build it. So that was exactly what I wanted, though. Like I wanted to be thrown in and do everything that I knew I wouldn't be able to based on my credentials alone. And ultimately, that's where I really got deeply involved with understanding how the business worked from the bottom up. Like I understood like product from the bottom up. I understood like the unit economics and kind of what our growth model was. It just became intuition. And I think that's what really set me up well to do what I'm doing now, which is working with a lot of early stage founders. I became an executive running BD and partnerships and, doing on some special projects here and there with the CEO. But that generalist kind of like figuring it out and then really having that strategic mindset to integrate it all. I think that was sort of my special gift, was that like you throw me into launching a new media type, then I'll do it. I'll figure it out. We'll get it done. We ended up acquiring a small startup in Prague. Who knew that, my first year in, we do a cross-border M&A deal. So
Sure.
it's like, got to lead that. And now we have to lead the integration. So it's not just leading the actual acquisition, which is what I was doing as a banker. Now it's like, hey, there's culture here. There's all this know-how. How do we transfer that? What's the strategy? Do we sunset this product, et cetera? Like what are the implications to SEO? But ultimately what you end up realizing, you do enough of these all over, you really build a deep intuition of like how the world you live in works, who your customers actually are. You really end up becoming a powerhouse of like just organic driven growth. And that's what really specialized, but ultimately really set Pond 5 up to get to a place where we could have the luxury of raising a Series A with Excel. And that was because 90% of our business was all organically driven. We had a very lean team, incredibly profitable. And when you're spending little to no money on marketing spend and nobody knows you, but you're growing like gangbusters, you're cash flowing as a startup, and eventually someone's going to find out. And that was another business lesson, was like, there's always that transactional element that a lot of, I think, early stage founders have been unfortunately taught. It's like, you got to build and, sell the company. But I think if that's all you care about is a transaction, you're never going to build a good business, in my opinion. Like, you're always going to build towards something that's less optimal towards the customer. And that's really it. It's like, it's as simple as just being obsessed with your customers and doing everything you can to like reach out to them. And that was the other thing. They were just an email away. Like, they were just a phone call away. Like, we would have customers fly in, we would fly people in, or they would want to, out of their own volition, visit us. And they would actually spend money to actually visit us, right? Like, that's how committed we were. And I think once you get to a certain scale, all that stuff goes out the door, because all of a sudden, like, you're so distant from just like one single customer. You haven't experienced their pain through their words, through their conversations, through them looking at you in the eyes and blaming you. If you get so distant from that, that's just the beginning of the end. And I've seen so many companies that had that scale, but they didn't know how to scale that part of it, because that part of it is like so obvious, but sometimes the most obvious things get thrown away. I get surprised, like when I talk to senior executives at larger established institutions and companies, it's like, man, like, you haven't talked about like one single customer. You haven't invited me into their world. Like, do you even like your customer? Like, do you really care for that? And it's interesting how a guy like Bezos, that's literally what he would talk about all the time. And for some reason, I like to think it's because our human tendency is to throw away the most obvious thing and move on to the next thing that seems to be more sophisticated, more professionalized, more scaled, throw in all those business lingo, when in reality, the people that win the most are the ones who love their customer, know exactly how to satisfy the customer because they have a deep understanding of the problems, but then they feel it. And for some reason, as humans, we'd say, well, now we've got management, now we've got second tier, third tier, we've got the board. The board wants PR, investor relations. We got to hit our numbers. I think all those things are necessary because that's just how the world works. But like, once you lose the soul of like why you did it in the first place, then man, I think you've already lost.
In your role as business development, obviously you're doing a lot of high touch when it comes to customers. What did it practically look like for you, whether it was a Pond 5 or even, Filmpac now, which I want to dive into a little bit? What did it look like to merge what you were learning from what the customers was saying and practically have it also speak through kind of the marketing megaphone, or have them begin to translate it into their content? And I ask because oftentimes when an idea comes from one department and is needing to be brought to another department, it can either flow easily and be received through different strategies and techniques, or it can kind of be resisted because it wasn't their idea or they kind of disagree. But I don't know, tell me how you move it from just that conversation to marketing material.
Yeah, I think number one, hopefully, at an organizational level, you've already won the relationship internally, right? So I think
that's good.
That's obviously number one, right? It's like you're on a team. You just happen to have a certain role to play. So I think it's really important as just a person on a team to get to know your team. It's so common sense. It's so obvious, but I can't stress enough. Like, that's one side, I think, of one coin.
Yeah.
It's a pretty,
like the foundation almost.
The cover is huge. Yeah. So let's assume that's all covered and everyone's like on that kind of team. Half the battle with well-meaning people is that they don't have the data that you have, or they don't prioritize your data because their data is what they prioritize, right? So I think it's really important at the leadership level to integrate and have one single source of truth. I think what's measurable needs to actually be agreed upon in the first place. So is this really what it is? Okay, great. Perfect. So let's make sure that that's actually elevated in every idea that we do. Right? Any intuitive idea that we come up with, creative, whatever, marketing, campaigns, ideas, let's baseline it against that central repository of what is actually true. I think the other way what you were talking about of like, how do we win people over who are doing sales or different product or anything like that? You have to know the product so intimately well. Or if you're sales, you have to know marketing so intimately well. I had a really great CFO who did that all day, like he was just sitting in on meetings that he had no right to be in. He would not interrupt. He would just listen. And over time, it's amazing how you can start understanding intuitively like how this works. And that's what's so important is like before you pitch that idea, it's like the hope is that you kind of know sales enough that it's actually affecting your ideas. So again, it sounds really easy on paper. It's incredibly hard to do because it just requires work, and work that doesn't necessarily immediately provide fruit, but like you invest enough into this that it's going to become a part of your intuition.
It's work, but it's time more than anything. I think
That's
that feels, like you said, kind of unfruitful in the moment. Or, why did this CFO sit in on this marketing meeting? There was nothing that came from it in the immediate, but the decision he has to make in 6 months related to something that he now has a greater understanding of could be high impact. When you left Pond5, did you ever think that you were going to end up back in the licensing space? And I'd love you to share a little bit more about the differentiator, I would say, of Filmpac, because coming from a video production agency, the way you guys were built was very intriguing and solved a major problem within stock footage. So tell me a little bit about joining that organization.
Yeah, Filmpac launched on Facebook. That was sort of their first kind of launch to the world. Sure. And, within 3 months with 1,000 clips, I think they were already in 6-digit figures in a given month. I remember going to my CEO and saying, we need to buy this company, because I just knew that like craftsmanship in the creative space, people will always pay money for that. And over time, the way that I would differentiate Filmpac from the rest of the world of content licensing, especially if you're in the video editing world and whatnot, looking for footage libraries, is it's the only library where from the bottom up, it's premised on continuity, right? So you're not going to get lighting that just looks completely off from this other clip that, popped up in your search results. But you're also going to get everything scripted. And so talent becomes really important. So talent being involved in a variety of vignettes that you can stitch together, I think it's a game changer. For the first time ever in the world of kind of stock, you can actually build character dev. It's almost like you have a creative director by your side, but the difference is hundreds of thousands of scenes, hundreds of thousands of talent, hundreds of thousands of variety of locations and stories and vignettes, and it's all cohesive. And you're like, that's exactly what I need, right? So I think continuity is really important. I think the other one that's really important, especially now these days, is all of it's just pretty much originally shot. So we're doing things that are non-scalable. And I love that, because I know if you do non-scalable stuff, you'll eventually figure out how to do it in a scalable way. The problem, though, is people don't want to do the non-scalable stuff. So in this case, people would love to create amazing cinematic content that's filled with character development and scene continuity and all that stuff and technical standards that are all one and the same, but it's not practical, right, as a business. So therefore, they don't do it. So what I saw with Filmpac figure out was they did that. They did it more and more, and they figured it out. And we were able to figure out like how to actually scale this in such a way that the creative integrity would still be top notch. But now we're pushing stuff out where it's multiples more than you could ever dare imagine just 2 years ago. And it's cost efficient and it's very productive because now we have the data too, right? So like we know what people want. And that's the wonderful part about Filmpac is like we knew right from the start who we're going to win over. We're going to win over the elite creatives. We're going to win over those people. If we win those people over and they trust us, that's just going to trickle down into other niche segments that will find out about us and say, hey, I really love what they do. And so, that's one way Filmpac has really stood out.
Yeah. And for anybody who knows anything about the process of, again, like you said, compiling a story or creating character development and kind of thinks about that within the world of video content, because the stock problem that originated after there was kind of the initial wow of easy access stock via, online, and a lot of what Pond5 pioneered was the lack of continuity at times, the inability, for creators to have uploaded things that created, a storyline that was usable. And so that's where the emergence of the, that just feels like stock kind of saying came from, right? And in Filmpac totally changed the game on that.
Which kind of blows my mind away, because we're in the world of creative. Like, the irony is like, since when do you tell creatives, here's some very, very like generic, practical material that has low standards, but we have a lot of it. And again, it's not to downplay what Pond 5 does, but structurally, there was just a structural integrity that Filmpac had that just larger microstock mega libraries don't have anymore. So for us, we can play the slow game. And so we can be very meticulous and do things right. We're totally fine with being unknown because we know at the right time, people will eventually know about us, right? That word of mouth is real. Nine times out of 10, whenever we get inbounds coming in, it's just, oh yeah, the editor that I hired said, you got to use Filmpac on this project. Or this creative director said, I've been using you guys since I was a nobody. And it's like, now we got to figure out how do we get an enterprise license. And now that I'm, doing some larger work, you can make a lot of mistakes, but yet for some reason you just keep growing. You still succeed. You earned it because you earned their trust and you built the product they actually wanted and you didn't compromise. Somehow that compromise eventually happens the further distant you are from your core customer base. I think that's just inevitable. And I think that's really important. It's like you can't lose your core, but it's amazing how founders can give up so quickly and they just say, we're going to go to the enterprise because that's how we scale. Are they willing to say, man, there's no way you're going to close your doors. I will personally make sure you don't end up not being in existence because that's how much I care about this product. That's what makes Filmpac so special. When we ask those questions, people will say, that would be incredibly insane. If all of a sudden you said you close the doors and I don't have access to you anymore, I don't know. I actually don't know what I would do for 15% of my work. For some people, for 80% of my work.
A lot of the things you've shared that other, founders, startups are probably drooling at the idea of not being beholden to somebody else because profitability has created such a runway, right? Or having their organization really focused on the core customer and what they need and building something that, literally what you just said, building something that if it went away, people would say, how am I going to do 80% of my work? And that's how valuable it is. So I'd love to end on this for companies that want to instill some of those things into their startup. What is working with you? How can they get in touch with you best? What is just a minute version of what the beginning of your process looks like?
Yeah, so Filmpac is one of my clients, obviously. It's a labor of love, but I do have other clients that I work with very closely as well in early stage. So tech and AI, as well as media, obviously. And you can get a hold of me. You can reach out at chris@kingdomcome.io. So just email me, or you can just connect with me and send me a DM on LinkedIn. I try to be active there. I think that's how you and I connected, Dustin.
Good old LinkedIn.
Yeah, good old LinkedIn. And I think from a process standpoint, you just jump on a call. For me, a lot of it is just nurturing the relationship and us just getting to know each other because it is a high trust work, right? I sort of become the right-hand guy. The other thing too is I try not to just always advise. I do think there's only so much that you can get out of me just talking, right? At some point, the proof is in the pudding. And yeah, sometimes it works where you say something and then you can entrust it to someone else to execute it. And I work with founders who are incredible executors. But most of the time, it's kind of a new thing that we're executing, right? So there isn't that experience or that know-how. And that's where I come in, where I create that process. And really, it's all about getting in the weeds together and creating clarity around what we can do. And ultimately, what that is just winning deals, striking partnerships, maybe making some interesting product decisions that actually gets you to a much more organically driven, product-led business. Kind of all the above. But the main point is usually starts with entering into a new world and having somebody help navigate that with you, but like as an operator. And also at the same time, when you do that, you build resiliency together. And that's the fun part about it, is that they end up learning things. And that's a pretty empowering thing because now we have an understanding that they can take to the organization and transfer that at some point. So
Yeah, I think that the mindsets that you bring to the table are incredibly powerful. I know that I'll be re-listening to this for a couple of nuggets that really stood out to me as oh, I really want to take this back to our studio. But also the fact that you are somebody who likes to get your hands dirty, and it aligns with your perspective on, with a company you're advising, you want to be in the problems with them, just like you did it with customers at Pond 5. So Chris, thanks for coming on the episode. I know people are going to listen back to this for sure. And if you think you might be a right fit, or a while at least, have a conversation with Chris, reach out. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, man.